Well, good evening, everyone. So we're going to continue the study, sort of, that we did last night. I'm going to review it because we needed this line to understand what I'm going to present. Now, we know that Samuel Snow wrote a letter on February 16th, and it was published on February 22nd. And this date here is the dedication of the temple, because this is the third day of the 12th month in 1844. And we found in Ezra chapter 6 that the third day of the 12th month was the 12th day, 12th day of the third month, which is March 12th in 515 BC. And that there was a Passover that followed 40 days later, which is, of course, the 14th day of the first month. And this Passover is in 1844. He writes this letter on February 16th. It's published in the Midnight Cry on the date of the dedication of the temple, and then it's republished on the Passover, but the incorrect Passover. That is, it's on April 3rd, which is the 14th day of the 13th month, but this is the date in 1844 that the Jews and the Karaites kept the Passover. So this is the Passover in 1844, but it's the wrong Passover. And then we have the first day of the first month, and then we have Samuel Snow's second letter, published on May 2nd, which is Passover. That's the Passover that matches the 10th day of the 7th month, being October 22 in 1844. So you got the Day of Atonement. And then we know that he has another letter. So this is his first letter. This is his second letter. And we found that there was also, and this isn't in proportion here, but we have midnight over here, the 5th day of the 4th month, which is July 21st. And then 3 days before that, he has this letter, his last letter, which is published on July 18th. So this is his second letter, and then there's his third letter, is written on June 22nd. And this is Pentecost, because this is the 6th day of the third month. So this is Pentecost. This Passover then is obviously the 14th day of the first month, if this is the 10th day of the 7th month. So we got April 19th. So this is just kind of understanding Samuel Snow's letters, that there is this chiasm. From here to here is 2 months and 16 days, and from here to here is 2 months and 16 days. Which is this date, second month, 16th day, written the way we write Jewish dates. Right? So we have this here. Normally Jewish dates we do the day first, but I'm using that system. So this period of time here makes May 2nd the center of a chiasm, and that chiasm is this, which is on the 1863 chart. And this chiasm hides the 2520, because we know that 42 weeks is the same as 3.5 years. and 1260 days. Right? So
It's supposed to be 34 AD at the end.
34, pardon me, yeah. And this is 31 here. Thank you. So there we have this hidden on the 1863 chart. You can see 1260 and 1260 equals 2520. So even though they didn't intend to have the 2520 on the chart, they have it there hidden in Christ's week. And this is going to be our study today. So I'm going to look at a few things regarding this. So I'm going to erase this again. So we know there's this chiasm. And at the center of this chiasm is the May 2nd date. And so we're going to come back to that a little bit later. But I want to look at this, and I did discuss it a little bit, but we all know that we have the prophetic mirror, 742 BC. Isaiah has a prophecy in Isaiah chapter 7 about 65 years. And that prophecy in Isaiah 7, I probably should do a more detailed study on it sometime. But in Isaiah 7, we just read verses 8 and 9 that talks about within 65 years, Ephraim shall be broken, that it be not a people. And we don't really go on and read the chapter. But one thing we find when we read the chapter in Isaiah 7 is there's a prophecy there about a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel. And there's an application that New Testament writers make of that passage that it applies to Christ. But if you read it, it's talking about a child that is born to within the house of David within a period of time which is this 65 years. And then it says the land shall be forsaken of both her kings before this child goes through this affliction. So when it says butter and honey shall he may eat, that he may know to choose the good and refuse the evil, people think this has something to do with the child eating food. But if you do a study on the butter and honey, this is about affliction, this is about the land being depopulated. And, you know, I'm not doing a study on it right now, but if you ever want to do a study on it, look up who Manasseh's mother is, and then look up that name because it's Hephzibah, and then look up Hephzibah later on in Isaiah 62. And you'll see that what's happening in Isaiah 7 is a prophecy about Manasseh's birth. So this virgin that shall conceive is not a woman, even though Hephzibah is the mother. She symbolizes the land. And just as in Revelation chapter 12, where we see this woman with clothed with the sun, the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars, and she gives birth to this man-child. Who is that woman in Revelation 12? I know I'm moving through stuff quickly. It's not the church. We often say it's the church, but it's Israel, right? It's the Jews. Jesus is born a Jew. And so we can see that that woman is not an actual woman, right? It's not a person. It's not Mary. And so we can see that in the prophecy in Isaiah 7, it's not referring to a woman giving birth to a son, but it's the land of Israel giving birth to a son. And that's why when the land is forsaken of both her kings, this child will then be converted. He will learn to choose the good and refuse the evil. It's referring to 677. So, the land's forsaken of both her kings. This is the prophecy in Isaiah 7. And we know in 723, the first king is taken. That's Hoshea, right? 19 years. And then in 677, Manasseh's taken. So this is old news for us as far as understanding this chiasm. But this period of 65 years has to do with the land. When the land's forsaken of both her kings. So it's dealing with the kingship, but also the land. And we know at the end of this, we have 1863, we have 1844, and 1798. So again, we have 19 years and 46 years. And there's things that happen here. There's a civil war between the North and the South. But here, The north is Confederate, talks about in Isaiah 7. And here there's the civil war between the north and the south. Now this is in the literal land of Israel. This is in the spiritual land of Israel. This is in the United States. And this civil war, known as the Civil War, the south is Confederate. So it's a mirror. There's things at the beginning and things at the end that are the same but different. They're opposites. But they have to be similar in order to be opposites. And we know with this prophetic mirror, there's nothing that marks the center of it, but there are two 25-20s. There's one for Samaria, or northern Israel, and there's one for Jerusalem, or Judah, here. And so these two 25-20s help construct this prophetic mirror. This 25-20, as you know, in 538 AD, it's divided into two 1260s. And this 1260 and this 1260 are a counterfeit of these two 1260s. That is, this 25-20 is the Satanic covenant, and this is Christ's covenant. So you can see that these things are related, that what happens here in Christ week structurally is related to this. And we know that paganism is a counterfeit of the earthly sanctuary and animal sacrifices, and papalism is a counterfeit of the heavenly sanctuary. And we can see here that Christ ministers for 3.5 years on earth, and then he ministers for 3.5 years in heaven. So this is counterfeiting and copying this. Does everybody understands this quite well? I mean, I reviewed it very quickly, but we should know this. Yes, Larry?
I was wondering, I missed what you said. Why did you put an 18 down there between 1844 and 18?
That's a 19.
Oh.
It's very badly drawn. There we go. So there's a 19 there. So we can see they mirror, and as Elder Parminder has said, it's not about the structure. The structure is giving us meaning about events. The structure itself is not the meaning. The structure is there to convey meaning and make connections between events. And so here we can see then in this structure, it tells us information, and it tells us that this is a counterfeit of this. Now, this whole mirror from 742 to 1863, if you add them together, you get 5, 0. I mean, I know what it is. And then you have to minus 1, because when you add BC and AD dates, you have to minus 1. If you subtract them, you have to add 1. So from 742 to 1863 is 2,604 years. So I showed this earlier in one of the classes. And we know then that that's the distance of time from there to there. And so this is important for what I'm going to be presenting later. I have to make sure that people understand this. That this whole prophetic mirror is part of a structure. And on the 1863 chart, they have this. And this is, and I did sort of touch on this a little bit. So if you take, he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. So 7 symbolizes the week, and 12 symbolizes the covenant. And why does 12 symbolize the covenant? Okay, 12 sons of Jacob, 12 disciples, right? 12, yeah, the 12 tribes. So that's, and if we multiply that together, we get 84. So you can see on the 1843 chart, they have this calculation, but they multiply it by 30 because there's 30 days in a month, and that's how they get the 25-20. As far as I know, this is the only place that you can find this calculation, though it might exist as a diagram somewhere, but I couldn't find it anywhere in the Pioneers' writings. So only on the 1843 chart, as far as I know, does that calculation exist. But if he confirms the covenant with many for 1 week, what number would we multiply 84 by for the midst of the week? So what's the midst of the week? How about the number 31? So if we multiply 84 by 31, we get the number 2,604. So this means that on the 1863 chart that has this diagram, not only is the 2520 represented, but in 742, this prophecy is revealed that gives the starting point for the two 2520s. 2,604 years later, on the 1863 chart, this is hidden. The 2520 is hidden, but also this 2,604 year prophetic mirror. Another way it could be done is you could simply say how many months is there. There's 84 months. And you could just say on either side of these 42, which is 84 months, 31 is dividing it. So you could kind of do it backwards and still get the same answer. So there's two different ways you could do the calculation. You could take the months, or you could take this formula, he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, and in the midst of the week he shall cause sacrifice and oblation to cease. So that's what we're going to be studying, is the midst of the week. This is just kind of a review. Some people might have been familiar with this. But the point is that what Jesus is doing in confirming the covenant is more than just, it's not a bunch of numbers. I mean, this is the gospel. Christ is the true curse. He's hanging between heaven and earth, and he's the gospel. And this is the center of all prophecy, and this chiasm is the chiasm of chiasms. That is, this is the most meaningful prophecy that we can have in the Bible. Christ being crucified and hanging there as a curse for us. Now, I've looked at this before. That is, some people have the objection. I don't know if you've ever run into this, maybe you haven't, but people say, well, this isn't really 20 days. That is, on a Jewish calendar, the years are not 360 days long. They can vary from 353, 354, 355, or 383, 384, or 385. If you have an extra month in there, the year can be 380 something. If there isn't, it's 350 something. Because the months are 30 and 29 days. And that's because the moon cycle is 29.53 days. So you don't have 30 days in your moon cycle. So people will object and they'll say, well, this isn't really, from when he's baptized to when Stephen is stoned, and we're going to look at that, the stoning of Stephen, couldn't really be 20 days if it's 7 years. It's going to be something more than 25-20. And so I've looked at it before, and I didn't have enough information at the time when I first looked at it. I knew that if I was going to figure out how long this was, I wasn't really sure when Jesus was baptized. I was pretty sure, I think, when Stephen was stoned. And so we're going to look at that. So we're going to draw this out again. So keep this all in your mind if you can, because we're going to come back to this, some of the things that are in this prophetic mirror. So people say I tend to go too fast. But I can go over some of these things if you have questions again. So let's look at the week of Christ. Now in Daniel 9, verse 26 to 27, let's turn there. And it says, and after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. And then the next part of the verse is going to talk about something else. And it says, and the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end of the war desolations are determined. This is one of those really cryptic sort of translation sentences. It's cryptic also in Hebrew. It's not the easiest thing to read. For this, where it talks about, so it talks about he shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. What is this talking about, this destruction of the city and the sanctuary? AD 70. So who's the people of the prince that shall come that shall destroy the city and the sanctuary? Okay, but so the people of the prince, those are the Romans. And then who's the prince? Titus, right? So it's referring to Titus. His armies are going to come and destroy the city and the sanctuary. And it says, the end thereof shall be with the flood, and unto the end of the war desolations are determined. So this is a flood which symbolizes lots of different things, but it can just refer to armies overspreading a country. And then in verse 27, we go back to the first topic. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, and in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and oblation to cease. So when it says he shall confirm the covenant, many people when they read this think it's the people of the prince that shall come. So, but the way that this is structured is we have verse 26 goes A1 and A2. The topic here is in the midst of the week, right? So the verse says, and after 62 weeks. So this is the Messiah being cut off. So the topic is the cross. And then here the topic is the destruction of Jerusalem. So maybe just a simple way to put it is 70 AD. And then, so that's verse 26. And then verse 27, the topic is, I shouldn't say A2, that should be B1. There we go. And this is A2. So again, the topic is the cross in verse 27. So in verse 27 it says, he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, and in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and oblation to cease. Right, so that's going to be A2, right? So it's the same topic as the verse above. And then the last part of the verse, and for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even unto the consummation, or the end, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. So this is dealing, again, the topic B2, which is 70 AD. Does that make sense to people, what's happening when you read these verses? So this is, what did Parminder call this in his classes? Repeat and enlarge, right? It's also a parallelism. It's just a parallel. The verses are parallel to each other. And if you don't recognize that, you can get mixed up on who's being talked about. Now, the interesting thing about this, and we're going to come back to this, is that the cross of Christ, this midst of the week, is written with this destruction of Jerusalem together with it. Now, why would that be? Why would the destruction of Jerusalem be the subtopic, I guess, when we're dealing with Christ confirming the covenant with many for 1 week, and in the midst of the week, him causing sacrifice and oblation to cease? So why would you think the destruction of Jerusalem is connected to this? Doesn't it kind of seem odd? When you think about it?
Christ?
Okay, they killed Christ, so we all killed Christ in a sense, but yes, the Jewish nation rejected Christ. They had a period of probation. And in 34 AD, when the 70 weeks ends, they have time before the execution of the sentence. So in 70 AD, the city and the sanctuary are going to be destroyed. So they're not destroyed right away in 34 AD. Okay, and did somebody have their hand up? So, there's a logic there, but when people first read about it, they don't think about it. At least I never thought about it. Maybe you have all thought about it. But why do they put that there? Now, I think there's reasons that go beyond this. That God He doesn't just do things randomly in His Word. And He has purposes that sometimes we don't see. And we're going to see how this is all relevant a little bit later on, but I just wanted you to think about that. Now, I do want to look a little bit at the destruction of the temple, just some interesting facts. So we know Ellen White writes about it in The Great Controversy. But there is an interesting fact that the first temple, Solomon's temple, was burned to the ground on the 10th day of the 5th month, Av, in 586 BC. And so we find this in the book of Jeremiah. So it's Jeremiah chapter 52, verse 12 and 13. So let's go there. Jeremiah 52, verse 12 and 13. Now you will find there's another place where it talks about this, and it says it's on the 7th day of the month. So and there's a reason for that. But anyway, we're going to look at this verse. So it says, "Now in the 5th month, in the 10th day of the month, which was the 19th year of Nebuchadrezzar, king of Babylon, came Nebuzaradan, captain of the guard, which served the king of Babylon, into Jerusalem, and burned the house of the Lord, and the king's house, and all the houses of Jerusalem, and all the houses of the great men burned he with fire." So here we see that the temple was destroyed on what day, according to this passage? On the 10th day of the 5th month. So, and I'm just going to, here's the passage from 2 Kings. So I'm just going to read this here. You don't need to turn there. But it reads almost exactly the same. It says, okay. Actually, I don't have the whole verse there. But what happens is it says the same thing, but it's not talking about the end. It talks about when he first gets to the city. So he gets there on the 7th day of the 5th month and begins the work, and then 3 days later he burns down the temple. So, but it's in 2 Kings 25:8 if you want to look that up. Yeah. So if you want to look it up, you'll see that it says the 7th day of the 10th month. But it's actually not talking, there's some wording difference, and I can't remember what it is right now, and I'm not going to turn there.
Is it 2 Kings what?
Here, let's turn there. 2 Kings 25:8, because I can't remember what the wording was.
Unto Jerusalem.
It's slightly different. So 2 Kings. Yeah, and it's different, like, it's not just that it's an English translation different. So 25, verse 8. Yeah, so it says, "In the 5th month, on the 7th day of the month, which is the 19th year of King Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came Nebuzaradan, captain of the guard, a servant of the king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem. And he burnt the house of the Lord, and the king's house, and all the houses of Jerusalem." So here it says, he came there, and this one in what's the difference there? In all the house, it doesn't have came?
They both have came.
Okay, what's the difference?
Into and unto Jerusalem. So unto means they've approached the city.
Yeah, into Jerusalem. The other one
days
says
later.
unto Jerusalem,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
And that's what it says in Hebrew as well. There's the difference. So coming into Jerusalem is different than coming unto Jerusalem. First, he just comes up to the city on the 7th day of the 5th month, but he goes into Jerusalem and burns the temple on the 10th day of the 5th month. And so some people see this as a contradiction, but it's not a contradiction. It's an apparent contradiction, but it's not a contradiction. It's complementary. So it tells us something. Now, this is from Josephus, War of the Jews, and if you want the reference, it's Book 6, Chapter 4, Paragraph 5. And this is about the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. And it says, "So Titus retired into the tower of Antonia and resolved to storm the temple the next day, early in the morning, with his whole army, and to encamp around about the holy house. But as for that house, God had, for certain, long ago doomed it to the fire. And now that fatal day came, according to the revolution of ages, It was the 10th day of the month Laus, which is Av, the 5th month, upon which it was formerly burnt by the king of Babylon. So it was burnt or destroyed on the same day in 70 AD as it was in 586. So it's a very interesting detail about this. Now the Jews celebrate the 9th of Av instead of the 10th because that's the day that the siege of the temple started in both histories. So the 10th day is when it actually burnt, but they keep the day before for some reason. I'm not sure why they do. I've tried to figure that out, but it doesn't really make, to me it doesn't make sense just because they start the attack on the temple that day. But anyway, it's the 10th day of the month, Av, so the 5th month. So in 70 AD, it's the 10th day of the 5th month that the temple is destroyed. And Ellen White gives a really nice account of it in The Great Controversy 32 and 35, in the chapter, the Destruction of Jerusalem. So now what I want to do is look a little bit deeper into this week of Christ. Now, I do give you, you do have a page there with a really nice drawing of what I'm going to do here. And we have the cross of Christ here. So this is the 70th week. And what ends the 70th week? When does it start? When does the 70 weeks begin? 70 weeks and the 2300 days begin together. When do they begin? In 457. On what day do they begin? We did the chiasm last night, and we showed that between the first day of the 5th month and the 20th day of the 9th month is the 10th day of the 7th month. And that becomes the starting point for the 2300 days and the 70 weeks. So when would the 70 weeks end? The 10th day of the 7th month. Now we know Stephen is stoned that day, and what does he see? And what else? So he sees heaven opened, and so that's in Acts chapter 7, verse 55 to 60. Let's go there. It says, "But he, Stephen, being full of the Holy Ghost, looked up steadfastly into heaven and saw the glory of God and Jesus standing on the right hand of God, and said, Behold, I see the heavens open and the Son of Man standing on the right hand of God. Then they cried with a loud voice and stopped their ears and ran upon him with one accord and cast him out of the city and stoned him. And the witnesses laid down their clothes at the young man's feet, whose name was Saul, who later became Paul. And they stoned Stephen, calling upon God and saying, Lord Jesus, receive my spirit. And he kneeled down and cried with a loud voice, Lord, lay not this sin to their charge. And when he had said this, he fell asleep." So we have this death of Stephen, but he has a vision. He sees the Son of Man standing on the right hand of God. And what would Jesus be doing standing? Why is he standing? What's that? He's standing, it's the Day of Atonement. The high priest is doing what? He's ending the work of the Day of Atonement. In this case, he's pronouncing judgment against God's people, against Jerusalem. So, this here is, of course, it's the Day of Atonement. And we would have to assume then, if this ends, the 70th week ends on the Day of Atonement, when would it begin? on the Day of Atonement. That's an assumption I'm making, but I'm going to put this here. So we're going to say that this week here begins here and ends here. Now, does anybody know when Jesus is crucified? What date he's crucified? Because if he's crucified in the middle of this, we're going to see how in the middle he is crucified. So we got the 10th day of the 7th month beginning and ending this 70th week. So it's a period of 70 years. This would be, of course, 34 AD. And this would be 27 AD. So when is Jesus crucified? Okay, so he's crucified on the 14th day of the first month. And this is in 31 AD. Now, what we have to then determine is what these dates are on our calendar. And so with the students this past week, past 2 weeks, it's hard to believe, but we've been going through how the calendar works and understanding how to place these dates. So you could just go to someplace on the internet and look up the dates on the Jewish calendar, but the Jewish calendar that we have today was created in the 4th century, actually in 360 AD by Rabbi Hillel. So it's a modern calendar. It's calculated, and it doesn't follow the rules of the Bible. It's based upon a repeating pattern of 19 years, and it can be off by a day or so. And also the Passover can occur much earlier than it can on the biblical calendar, because the Passover can occur before the spring equinox, when in the biblical calendar, the Passover, the earliest that it can be is April 5th. So,
Calendar
well, okay, the Karaite calendar,
that we describe now, made by this Rabbi Hillel.
no, that's the rabbinic calendar. Yeah, so the Karaites, they made a calendar in the 8th century, so about 400 years later, where they didn't like the calendar that the rabbis were using, so they created their own group, their own sect, and they started another type of calendar. Both these calendars, even though they disagree with each other, they also disagree with the biblical calendar. That is, in 1844, you would never have, on the Karaite calendar, you would never have the year start as late as April 19th. Because when you have a late year like that, you'll always have ripe barley in the spring. It would only be some earlier months, if the year was starting earlier, that the Karaites might start a month later than the Jews, than the rabbis. So, in order to mark Jesus' crucifixion in 31 AD on a Friday, the only date that will work is April 27th. So that's a Friday that Jesus was crucified. He could not have been crucified in March, because in that year, March would have been too early. So it just wouldn't work. Now, what I've done is if you have the notes, you have this calendar, which in color looks really nice. It doesn't work great because I have this key or legend, and the legend is in color. And so when you try to match them up, it doesn't quite work. Some of them sort of disappear. But if you turn, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4. So you turn to the 4th page, and it would be like this on the 4th page of the calendar. And you go down to the 4th group of calendars, and you go to the one on the far right. You'll see just above it, it says 31 AD, and then it says NI, which is for Nisan, and April. So the top date is the month Nisan, and it goes in that one. It shows 29, but it continues on the next line. And then the date underneath it is April 14th. So Nisan 1 is April 14th in 31 AD. And you can see that Jesus then, that dark, which is supposed to be blue with a red outline, it has the 14th of Nisan, which is the 27th of April. So that's when Jesus was crucified. So what I did is I then took this and I decided I'm going to count backwards. Now I have a program that I can do that, but I actually physically counted. And I counted backwards this way, 1,260 days. From here to here. Now I get the date. Well, I guess I'll do it up here. It's November 15th, 27 AD. And the date on the Jewish calendar, if I remember correctly, I don't. I think it was the 26th day of, the 26th day of the 8th month. I'm just going to check this again. Yeah. So we can find it here on this page. So if you go to your calendar here, it would be
More copies of that.
I don't even think I marked it on yours. So it's going to be October, that's October, November.
There's a 27.
Yeah, it's way easier for me to see. I can't even see this properly if it's not in color. So yeah, it would be 2715, and that's because it's not in color. It's just outlined in red. So it's the 27th day of Heshvan, and it's November 15th. So it's at the bottom of that first page of the calendar, right in the middle, and it's the second line from the bottom there. So so it doesn't really matter, but it's the 27th day of the 8th month. So this is 1,260 days. So you can see I'm short going backwards from April 27th, marking this as the midst of the week. The midst of this week is the cross, going back, and it's 1,260 days. But then I count the number of days from, and this is October, no, it's not October, it's September 30th, yeah. So this is September 30th, and if you count from September 30th to November 15th, you'll find out this is 46 days. So we notice something here, and I'm going to erase this. I'm going to need this space. So what do we notice? We got 1260, and then we have 46 days. So what does this look like?
1260 before.
Okay, so this would then be
Backwards.
538,
Yeah.
and this would be, now I could be going this way, but I'm going to go this way, and the reason I'm going this way should be obvious, because 1844 is the 10th day of the 7th month. Right? So this would mean we have here, this is 538, and we count this way, and we find that we come to 1844 being the 10th day of the 7th month. Now we don't know exactly when Jesus was baptized. We know it was in the fall. The Bible doesn't give us a date. So, we could maybe argue, maybe he was baptized here. We don't know for certain. But what we do know is that if we take this 1260, it falls short of the 10th day of the 7th month, but we get that 46. So it's kind of an interesting idea. It's not complete yet, but this was intriguing when I first looked at this. I thought, well, here we have the prophetic mirror. So what would you do next? Okay, you're going to go the other way. Yeah, that's what I did. And so I did 1,260 days, and I came to a date here, which is 4 days short. That is, this is October 12th, and this here is October 8th. So this is just 4 days short. So it would have been nice if it landed right on there, right? But God always has the way that he does things. Now, there's an interesting fact that if you go from here to here, from the 10th day of the 7th month to the 10th day of the 7th month, and you count them, you find that this period of time here is 70 days. And of course, all we have here are 2520 and 4 and 46. So we have 50 days added to complete the prophetic mirror. And 50 days, of course, is the cycle of Pentecost. It's also a Jubilee cycle. So the fact that it's 2570 is still really interesting. And if I go from any date in 27 AD to any date in 34 AD on the Jewish calendar, it'll always be 2570 days. So I'm going to continue going this way. So I thought, well, I got to finish this off. So I know that this is, over here I have 46, so here I need 19. So I'm going to have to add 15 days to get my 19 years here, right? So I got 46. Oh, pardon me. Am I doing this right? Yes. Yes, I'm doing that right. And then over here I'm going to have 46 days. So I'm going to have 46, 46. So that means that this is 742, this is 723, and this is 677, right? So now I'm taking these days of Christ's week, I'm basically laying them over top of the counterfeit of this week, but I'm doing it backwards. And I'm doing it backwards because that's what indicated here by this being the 10th day of the 7th month. I wouldn't have the 10th day of the 7th month fall in the right place if I went this way. So I'm going backwards this way. It's interesting how God has designed this. So we can follow this so far. This kind of makes sense what I'm doing. So I have these dates now going this way. And the date here on the Jewish calendar is going to be the 25th day of the 7th month. October 27th. But it's the 25th day of the 7th month on the Jewish calendar. Now remember what we did with numbers. See how we have 2570 and 257? So we have this connection. So this date doesn't end up being just some arbitrary number. It's something that tells me about this number here. This here, to try to sort this out, there's some stuff in here that, we could look at. But I then put 19 years on this side. Right? So now we got this completed. So if I put 19 years here, what do I get as that matches 1863? I get September 11th. Okay, well, we'll just do it this way. 9/11. In 27 AD. Does that make sense? So now this tells us something about our message. So we have bits and pieces of our message in here. We have the prophetic mirror, but we also have 9/11 being marked by going to the end of this chiasm.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so the first time I showed this to someone, and she always does this every time I show her something, she asks me a question. And the question was, well, you got these dates here. What happens when you put other dates on this timeline? Do they produce like other years? Are they going to produce interesting dates? So I thought about it and I thought, well, what date would be the most significant date that I could put on here and see if it matches a significant date? So what date would you choose in this whole timeline? So you got, remember, this here is Christ's week, but this here is going through the whole prophetic mirror. So I have all kinds of dates I could choose from, but what would be the most likely date or the most important date that I could choose going, anywhere on this period of time?
Maybe 457?
Okay, well, yeah, 457 ends up being way over here, so it doesn't go in the realm pardon me. Yeah, no, 457 is here, you're right. I'm going backwards. Yeah, so 457 is here, so yeah, I think I did look at 457. But the date that I thought would be the most important is the one that's mentioned in these verses. What was the date that was mentioned in these verses? 70 AD, right? So I know this isn't quite to proportion here, but between 70 AD and 538 is 468 years. So I just counted back, taking this as 538. I went 468 years. Here, I'll do it up here. 468 years back to 70 AD. So here we got 70 AD. And on the calendar here, you would have to go to, I think it's the 5th page. So it's the 5th page. The 5th page will have in the second row to the right column, it'll have AD 32. And then you go all the way to the bottom row on the left, and you can see there, that's the month of Av. And you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And that date on our calendar is August 7th, but it's the 10th of Av. So which date was, what's that? No, it's August, because July ends 29, 30, 31, and then it starts counting August. So August 7th is 468 days away from April 27th. So if you used a calendar converter, the calculator, you can count the Julian day numbers, you can count how many days it is, but it'll bring you to August 7th. But if we use this timeline here, the date we get is the 10th day of the 5th month of. So that's the date that the temple was destroyed. And that's the most likely date that I should find in this week, because that's the one the verse talks about, where both in 586 and 70 AD, the temple was destroyed on this date. So now we see that this means that this sort of speculative kind of timeline that I've drawn is confirmed that this then is structurally sound. Because the chances of that occurring, it's just not likely. So the fact that 70 AD lines up with the correct date that it was destroyed on tells us that there's something right about this. Now, what would we do next? So now that we have this covenant week, we have the whole prophetic mirror, what would you do next? Well, we could try going back in time, but what if we go more this way? What if we start looking at dates in the future, after 1863? So what would you do, 1863, and you want to look at our time, right? You want to see where we're
I
at.
would flip the whole thing backwards, because this is all backwards to me.
Okay, the fact that these dates go backwards? Yeah, I know, it confuses me too. But the reason why we have to do it this way is this is the way the calendar works. If we went the other way, we don't get any of this structure. So this structure is created this way. And it's a mirror, so mirrors can be backwards,
Yeah.
right?
We just have to put a mirror up.
Yeah. So anyway, what would you do? You got 1863 and you want to figure out how many days you're going to put.
How about
Well-
1888?
Yeah, so you could put 1888 on there, and you could figure out which date it is. 1989 you could put on there. What about 2014? Okay, so let's try that. So we're going to put over here 2014. And I was lying in bed and I'm thinking about this. Okay, so I'm over here on September 11th, and I'm going to be in 27 AD, and I'm going to go back 151 days, right? So I'm going to, or forward, if you want to think of it that way. So I'm going to go back 151 days from 1863 to 2014. And that's really close to the Passover, right? Wouldn't that be cool if this landed on the Passover, right? So I counted it back, and you'll see it on the first page of your calendar. It's not marked, but it's on the Sunday, and it's the 17th of Nisan, not the 14th, and it's the 13th day of April. And so here's where I ended up. I ended up with, so the 17th day of the first month. And I fell short, and that really annoyed me, right? Because I think it should go to Passover. That would make all the sense in the world, because when we dealt with that Samuel Snow's letters, remember we had all these Passovers, right? The April 3rd one, and the May 2nd one, and we came to understand that May 2nd was this chiasm, right? And that's what we're doing, is we're doing this chiasm, and we came to understand that this is 2014, that this PBM, so we could mark, not that it's really the PBM, but this doesn't really make much sense sometimes when we think about it, because this is this whole increase of knowledge that's predicting some event. But we know that this chiasm is right here. And so that's what we're studying. And this is the Passover. And so I would have really liked it to end on the Passover. It didn't. So, okay. Now, when I was figuring this out, was in August. Yeah, Daniel?
Something that begins in September ends in January.
Because this is going this way, and this isn't January. This is April 13th. Because the days are going this way, the years are going this way. So 151 days from April 13th to September 11th, that's how many days it is. If you count on your calendar, April 13th to September 11th, 151 days. Yeah?
But shouldn't be like, if begins in the 10th day of the 7th month, should end in the 10th day of the 7th month. If begins in the first month, should end in the first month.
Okay, so this begins on the 10th day of the 7th month and ends in the 10th day of the 7th month. These are 7 years. So now I'm just counting days back from here. 19 days brings me 19 years, 1863. 151 days is going to bring me to the spring, right? Because this is only 170 days from here to here, right? So it's not 360. It's 170 days. That makes sense? Okay, so now I'm here and I have this problem. It doesn't work. And while I was in Alberta, the first thing that Elder Jeff presented was a study from a brother in Ireland, Stephen, and he was doing something kind of odd, because he's kind of like me. He does all these number things. And he had just counted all the days from Pentecost. So he went 50 days after this, and he counted all the days from here, from 50 days after the cross. So this is the 6th day of the 3rd month, Pentecost, to the 10th day of the 7th month in 1844. So he counted all the days, not by hand, but using a computer program. And then he divided them by 1844. And I wasn't really, to me it didn't really, he divided them by 359. So I can't remember the number of days that he had. I should be able to remember every number. But he divided it by 359. So what he figured is that in every year, there's 360 symbolic days, and one of them is the days of atonement. So he took that day out, and then he divided the number of days, And he got the number 1844 with a whole bunch of decimals. And I didn't like it because one is it's not precise, but also it didn't really make sense to take that day out. So what I did is I made this calculation, 1844 times 360. Because if I'm going to represent 1844 years prophetically, I'm going to represent them by the prophetic year, not 365 and a quarter. So I multiplied these together and I got 663,840 days. And then what I did is I counted back from here, the 10th day of the 7th month, and I counted back just like he did, and I wanted to see where I ended up. So when I did that, I found, so here let's, I was actually sitting here in class doing this. So I counted back, and here's the cross, and we have 1,260 days. We had these 19 days. We had these 151 days. And we had this representing 2014. So this is just a simplification of that. And when I counted from here to here, this is the 17th day of the first month. This is 663,840 days. So that means that this 2014 is connected to the 10th day of the 7th month in 1844 by simply multiplying 1844 by 360. So this then told me that there's a significance in 2014 in its connection to October 22nd, 1844. And I know this may seem a little bit
Would it be a day of atonement?
esoteric. No, it's not a Day of Atonement. This is 3 days after the Passover. So, so this date here, this was April 13th, which doesn't really matter. But what I did is I said, well, there's 3 days to Passover. So the 14th day of the first month would be 2017. And this would be Passover. Now, this doesn't mean as much maybe to everybody here, but it means a lot to me. Because what happened in 2017? Lots of things, right? But in relationship to 2014, what happened in 2017? Because what does 2014 represent? In Samuel Snow's letters, 2014 is May 2nd. It's a Passover. Now, I thought 2014 should be the Passover, but it's not. It's 3 days short of coming to the Passover. So we had labeled it as the prediction before midnight. But in 2017, that's when we came to understand it. And, I sort of, unless you're really familiar with the history, it's kind of hard to explain. But when we look at Samuel Snow's letters, they do this progression. So again, Samuel Snow's letters have the first day of the first month here, with a Passover on this side and a Passover on this side. This Passover is not the correct Passover, and so the people who accept this as Passover could never accept October 22nd as the Day of Atonement. Because if this is Passover, September 23rd is the Day of Atonement. So in order to get to this Passover, you have to go through the first disappointment. And this first disappointment is a separation between what? What is this a separation of? Who's on this side of April 19th? Okay, the Protestants, right? Who's on this side? The Millerites. So it separates two classes. They both have information, but this group doesn't accept this. Now some of them might have initially accepted this, but once they got to the first day of the first month, April 19th, they're going to say, no, that all was a delusion, right? And they become the mockers. And so Samuel Snow deals with this idea that we needed, it was necessary to separate these two classes so that God could continue to give us light. So this Passover is May 2nd, and what I was saying last year is that we're at Passover. That is, in 2014 we began this separation. In 2017 we recognized that the separation was still happening. So for 3 years there was this large groups of people leaving this message, starting in 2014, and definitely, we hope, I believe, ending in 2017. We still have had some remnants of that in 2018, but really, that rebellion was in 2017. Correct? Would people see that as what happened? So 2017 started a new rebellion that ended. Few people left in 2018, but basically it was here. And I was saying in 2017 that we were at Passover. But on this chart, 2017 is Passover. Does that make sense? So even though May 2nd is the Passover date, it wasn't here until we realize that this separation of the two classes which occurs at Passover, Judas, you know, he betrays Christ at Passover. So your question is, dealing with this 360, because that's what you're focused on. So here we have 360 is the principle, so 360 days in a year, and I multiply it by 1844. This is something I wouldn't have thought of doing. But this is the number of days, and so if you start here and you go back, you get this date. So for me personally, to be stuck with this date, I'm stuck 17th day of the first month being 2014, me wanting it to be Passover. But the prediction before midnight, what's the symbol of the prediction before midnight? What did we have in the chiasms in 457 BC? What did we have? What's that? Okay, but what number did we have? We had this 3, right? 3 days. So remember, there's 3 days at the river Ahava, 3 days after they get to Jerusalem, before they bring the gold to the temple, and 3 days call to repentance, and those 3 days mark these chiasms. So the 3 days here, which is 3 years, this way, but 3 days that way, this 3 days is a symbol of the PBM. This is understood last year. So the fact that there's 3 days from the 17th day of the first month to the 14th day of the first month, and that the 14th day of the first month is being Passover, this to me ties us into this timeline. It's telling us something about where we are at. That is, it's telling us that 2017 was Passover. Now in Samuel Snow's letters, what was the next letter? Which date was it on? What event? So this was the June 22nd letter. And what date was that on the Jewish calendar? It was Pentecost. So it was the 6th day of the 3rd month. So this was Pentecost. So in Samuel Snow's letters, we have these 2 Passovers that cause this division, these 2 classes. In our history, that goes from 2014 to 2017. And then the next waymark is Pentecost. And what is Pentecost? If we're going to look at it as a symbol, what is it about? What happens at Pentecost? The Holy Spirit's poured out on the disciples, right? What's happening at Pentecost? How would you describe Pentecost? Anybody got any ideas? What's that?
All the disciples are prepared to go forth and spread the message worldwide. They have gifts.
Okay, so they're going to spread the message worldwide.
Wasn't it before Pentecost they had repenting and confessing their sins?
So there's some work of repenting, setting aside pride, and then God then establishes His church. When He's pouring out that Holy Spirit, Christ is setting up his work in the holy place of the heavenly sanctuary, so he's beginning his work up in heaven. So there's a change of dispensation that occurs. But we also know that he's establishing his church on earth. And that would be described as the work of organization. If I was going to put it into our history, after 2017, now I know we started the work of organization earlier, we talked about organization, but now we're in the work of organization. And what had to happen in order for organization to occur? According to Samuel Snow, what did he say that had to happen in his June 22nd letter? The mockers had to be separated from us. So in order for us to have a Pentecost experience, what had to happen for us? There has to be a separation. The false priests have to be separated from the true priests. Am I making sense? Does that make sense of what's happening?
Are you counting literal days from, like, how do you get to that number? Are
Okay,
they literal
these
days?
are the literal days, right up here, and these are going this way, from 27 AD to 34 AD.
Yeah, no, what I'm asking is
And-
that number of 6.
That's literal days from April 13th, 27 AD to October 22nd, 1844. That's the actual number of days on the calendar, which is 1844 times 360.
Where did you come up with that?
I didn't. This is Stephen Jameson from Ireland. He came up with this idea, but he was multiplying 359, and he was going from Pentecost over here to 1844, but he had decimal places left over. And I don't like having decimal places left over. He was actually falling short because it was 1844, and to get to October 22nd, he needed decimals, right?
Why wasn't he using 360 instead of 315?
That's a good question. But he was just thinking, well, the Days of Atonement, I'm going to take those out. But to me, that makes no sense. They need to be included, right? To have a year, you don't take out the Days of Atonement. So when I was stuck here, I thought of this, doing this and seeing where I would come to, just in my head. I do this when I'm lying in bed. So I knew I came really close, and I figured I was probably on the 17th as I counted it, but I wanted to be sure. When I confirmed it with the computer, it was the 17th day of the first month. But to my mind, it was 3 days short of where I wanted to end. I wanted to end on the 14th day of the first month, but I didn't, because I wanted 2014 to be here, but 2014 is not there, it's here. So this is 2017, and so, I think this is better, once I look at it, because it's telling something that I already knew, is that in 2017, I was saying at least, that we're in Passover. That's the way I looked at it. In Samuel Snow's letters, we were at May 2nd last year when we were discovering May 2nd. When we were discovering, the center of that chiasm, calling it the PBM, that's where we were. We were at the same place. Now, I dealt with him when I looked at Samuel Snow's letters, because in Samuel Snow's letters, he uses a fake news story called the Death Warrant of Jesus Christ to come to the date 31 AD in a very roundabout way, and I went through it in the class. And so to him it was a confirmation. He had this fake news that was a confirmation of what he was discovering, that Jesus was crucified in 31 AD. He also used William Hale's chronology that has Jesus crucified on March 27th, 31 AD, which is a Tuesday, so it doesn't even align up with the Bible. But Samuel Snow didn't work out all the details. In our history, we were talking about Russia and our church in Russia, and the Jehovah's Witnesses were getting their churches taken away because they weren't following the rules. And there was some fake news regarding that was happening to Seventh-day Adventist churches in Russia. And so in our prediction, there was some fake news associated with it. And so to me, I'm saying this means we're repeating Samuel Snow's letters. We have this parallel with what's happening. What was happening to Samuel Snow was happening to this movement. And it was about our prediction, which our prediction is Raphia, where their prediction was the second coming, 10th day of the 7th month. So I know there's probably lots of things I forget to include in that. But for me, that's why I was saying we were at Passover, and the next step would be Pentecost. The next step would be organization. And so to have those people separated from us was necessary to get to where we are now. And we couldn't have the discussions we're having and the studies we're having if there was that rebellious spirit in this group. You know, we've presented some pretty, controversial, I think, things to say the least, maybe a bit incendiary, but, and it's creating a big hubbub on Facebook and social media, people attacking us for time setting and other things. But we're accepting these things because God has removed those people from us. And so I think, based on this line, that organization should be happening. But that means there's also this work that's happening. We're coming to Pentecost. Are we, at Pentecost yet? I don't know, but we've passed Passover in Samuel Snow's letters. We've gone from May 2nd, and we're now moving toward June 22nd, if we're not already there. And then the next waymark is the 4th letter, which is 3 days before midnight. It's on July 18th. And that letter is the end of the chiasm. I showed you that at the beginning. So that July 18th is 3 days, and again we have that 3 days symbol. So that 3 days keeps showing up. It shows up, in the chiasms in 457. It shows up between the chiasm and midnight in 1844. And it shows up here between 2014 and 2017. 3 literal years, but 3 days. And so that means we're moving this way. Now, I did present, so I'm going to present something. This is a little bit speculative. I hate speculating. And I'm not saying it means anything. But last night we found that William Miller used what date to start the 70 weeks? I always thought it was the first day of the first month. But what date was it that he used? The 12th of the first month. The 12th day of the first month, because that's the day that Judas sold Christ to the priests. Correct? And that's 2 days before the 14th. So if I went here, the 12th day of the first month, and I put these 2 days in here, I come to 2019 as what? Who's selling who? In the story, in the 12th day of the first month. What's happening? What's Judas doing? And how would we parallel that with our history? I'm predicting something in 2019, so it's speculation.
So somebody's gonna sell us out to the authorities?
Yeah, so somebody's going to sell us out to the authorities. This would be,
One of us, or one who was in the movement.
either somebody who was in the movement or somebody maybe who's in the movement now, an individual. I'm not certain, right? But if we were going to put a parallel to that, would that make sense? So, and that would fit in with our timeline of where we're at. That something's going to happen in 2019 that's going to affect this movement with the government, with the authorities. Yeah. Yes, Daniel.
Have you looked what we did in 2014, April 13?
What we did in 2014 on that date, you mean?
If you publish something,
Okay, I see what you're saying. You want to have all those dates on our calendar line up with, events in those years. Because I did that with,
if you look for
yeah, because we did this with these other ones. So this one, we found a date. Now, I don't know what happened on April 13th. I would have to look at that and then to look at what, April 10th would be in 2017, and then you're saying April 8th in 2019. We could maybe make a prediction that on April 8th in 2019, Heidi and I are going to have our 6th wedding anniversary, which that's the date we're going to have it. But, you know, maybe something else will happen. That makes sense? Not the wedding anniversary part, but that's our anniversary. So, yeah, so if we're going to look at this in 2019, we could look at April 8th. We could also figure out which is the 12th day of the first month in 2019, because it won't be the same, the same date in our year as it is in 27 AD, right? You understand what I'm saying? So we'd have to look at both dates. I know it gets confusing. That's why I had the students working through these calendars to try to sort that out. But this is a little bit provocative, I guess. I mean, I'm not really sure on this, but this is what I would do logically. Like, you're asking the right question, Daniel. You know, would we then put this into actual dates and make a prediction about an event? You know, I don't know if I would do that. But I'm just thinking of it now, right? So this is just an aside. But you see what happens as we do this. This does give us a model that we could theoretically use to predict something. And it's not like we're predicting the second coming of Christ. We're just looking at what's coming in our line for us at this point with this model. So, well, I hope that was interesting. I know you're not going to remember it all, but you can always watch the video or look over the notes. The notes here, of course, I didn't put everything in those notes. But you do have the calendar and you can do the counting. And you can try to figure it out and see if it makes sense. Now, there are some odd things that I did that you might think I'm one day short. Because the one thing I did is I didn't do it fullness of the year with the days. I counted a day as a year. I didn't start in the middle of a year. And then, so my 25-20 days is actually 25-20 whole days. It's not starting in the middle of one day and ending in the middle of another day. I couldn't do that. That was too difficult. So I think you might understand. Because if I counted how we count the 1260, if you counted from 723 to 1798, there's actually 21 years involved. You know, if you counted the first one as 1. But we counted as 0. So I counted it as 1. So some people might think I'm one day short. But there's a reason why I did it. So I know. So for those of you that are going to go through on the calendar and count everything. Okay, so thanks everybody for that. And let's close in prayer. And Philip, can you offer prayer for us?
Heavenly Father, at the end of this Sabbath day, and at the end of this study, we come to you to thank you for these wonderful numbers that you have shown us, the way that they align to the histories and the teaching that you're trying to convey through these. We know, Lord, that you present yourself in the Bible as Palmoni, as the wonderful number, and thank you for these wonderful revelations. We thank you for the setting that we have here, the framework that helps us build a character for eternity. Please help us have the willpower to do every work that we need to do to perfect our characters and our knowledge for your glory. Please be with us as we go to rest for the night, and please help us come back in the morning refreshed for a new day. We thank you for everything in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.